Hi and welcome to the Ruby and Pearls knitting channel. My name is Leah and today I'm filming another knit and chat for you. If you are a returning viewer, thank you so much for being here again. And if you are new, hi, I film regular standard format podcasts on this channel, but whenever I don't have quite enough content to film a podcast but I feel in the mood to film, that is when I will do things like knit and chats. So today I am here with another knit and chat, and I always try to make sure I have a topic ready for you for these knit and chats. So grab a nice beverage and your knitting and let's get cozy together. As you might be able to see in the title, I would like to talk to you today about successful garment knitting. Just a little disclaimer up front. If a successful garment can look very different to different people. If a garment is successful to you, that's the only thing that matters, right? It doesn't matter whether I think it's a successful garment, but I think it's important that we make things that we feel are a success and that not too many things go wrong, because knitting is a slow hobby and it takes a long time to make a garment. And I might be a very fast knitter with a lot of time on my hands, but not everybody is. And I would love to share my tips and tricks and help you be more successful in your garment knitting so that you don't make the mistakes that I've made, because I have made many. I have been discussing garment knitting and successful garment knitting with my lovely friend Emily from Emily Knits. I'll put her handle on screen and I highly recommend that you go check her out if you haven't already. And we have both been on a bit of a journey this year of unsuccessful garments. And I wanted to talk to you about those because I think it's important to discuss things that don't go right and try and find out why. Because for the last 5 or 6 years, I have been knitting garments one after the other, and I very rarely take a step back and pause and think about what has been successful and why and what I might have to change. So this is an opportunity for us to discover those things together. I think Emily and I have both had different issues with garments this year, and I'm sure she will talk about her fit issues that she has been having on her channel. But I have had a few issues, and I think I can give you 3 big tips that will hopefully make it possible for you to prevent the issues that I've been having. My first tip is gauge. Now, I could be a hypocrite and sit here and tell you to gauge swatch, and you probably know that I don't always gauge swatch. I will gauge swatch for a test knit. I will gauge swatch for an unusual pattern that I don't know how it will behave. I will gauge swatch if it's a yarn I've never used before, but generally speaking, I don't gauge swatch. And before I forget, I need to apologise. The lighting is failing massively, but this was just the only time I could film today. So gauge is extremely important because gauge dictates how a pattern's going to turn out. You, as a designer, you work with your gauge and you base your entire garment on your gauge. And I'm not going to tell you that you have to get perfect gauge, but you need to become accustomed to making modifications if your gauge isn't perfect. For example, I am knitting the Lakes Sweater V-neck, Lakes Pullover V-neck by Ozetta. It doesn't look like much at the moment because it's missing the neckband. I'm currently working on a sleeve, and I'm working on this as a buddy knit along with my lovely friend Emily. We both decided that we wanted to find a pattern that we thought would be successful for both of us, and we are now knitting the Lakes Pullover. She's knitting the crew neck, I'm knitting the V-neck. The main reason I picked the V-neck is because it has a slightly bigger gauge and I wanted to use this King Cole Simply Denim Chunky for mine. The gauge in the pattern is 17 stitches. I am actually only getting 16, and I found that out by measuring as I've been knitting. So this is a saddle shoulder design, and I just knit the first saddle and measured and tried to figure out where I'm at with my gauge. And I will often do that. I'll often just start and be prepared to rip back. So that is also a possibility. And if you like an oversized sort of relaxed fitting garment, having slight gauge issues is not that big of a problem. So I'm aware that my gauge is too big, therefore I need to size down. And I was somewhere between size 2 and 3, so I've decided to go for size 2. I've also made some calculations to figure out exactly how much ease that will give me. And by knowing my gauge and understanding my gauge, I have been able to do those modifications. So gauge is very, very important. If you don't want to swatch, at least measure as you go and try and figure out whether you are roughly on track. I personally think it's very doable to go up one size or go down one size, but much more than that you can't really do without having other fit issues. So as long as you're getting a fabric that you enjoy, which I think is very important, then you can make some small adjustments. So that's gauge. That's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is my biggest tip for you, and that is learn to understand ease. And I think I never really understood ease. So going back to gauge briefly, when I first started knitting garments, I was perfectly happy as long as the garment could go on my body one way or another. I didn't even check ease. I didn't care whether mine had the same kind of fit as the garment on the model. As long as it was wearable, I was so pleased that I managed to make something that was wearable. I didn't really care about anything else. And I probably made some very ill-fitting garments for a very long time. And I think I realised from early on that I was a loose knitter. And instead of checking my gauge regularly, I would just size down a couple of needle sizes. But then subconsciously, I became a tighter knitter, and I've got a pretty standard gauge now, but I was still sizing down in needle size. So I just kept ending up with things that were too small. I could fit in them, but they didn't look very flattering. So that is when I started learning about ease. So gauge and ease kind of go hand in hand. These things all go hand in hand, right? But ease is such an important thing. If you're not familiar with what ease means, essentially positive ease means a garment is bigger than you. Negative ease means it's smaller than you. And then there's positive ease is normally followed by a number. So for example, 25 centimeters of positive ease means that the finished garment has a circumference that's 25 centimeters bigger than your bust circumference. Most garments are graded based off of your full bust, so that is kind of where you measure and then size up from. And I recently discovered my issues with ease again when I knit the Stanford sweater by the Knit Pearl Girl, which had somewhere between I think 13 and 15 centimeters of positive ease. And I finally decided to measure my bust and then measure my hips and check what difference there is. And lo and behold, there's 15 centimetres. My hips are 15 centimetres bigger than my bust. And the problem with that is that if a garment only has 15 centimetres of positive ease, I reach a problem if I knit a full length pullover, because when the garment reaches my hips, it will have 0 ease. And I can make adjustments for that by increasing and doing some A-line shaping, or doing some split hem modifications, or cropping the garment. But I then often wind up overly cropping my sweaters to accommodate for my slightly wider hips than bust. And I think it's very normal for us to not have perfect ratio, not have exactly the same hip circumference as bust circumference. But these are things that we need to become more familiar with. We need to become used to measuring our bodies. And we shouldn't just be used to measuring our bodies, we should get used to measuring our clothing as well. And people have told me this time and time again. For some reason, I've never done it. So the tip has been out there. You've probably heard this countless times. Measure a sweater that you like and see how much bigger it is than your circumference. You can also obviously measure it for reference. People often measure them for reference of length. If they're knitting for somebody else, like a partner, they might measure their favourite jumper. But measure the bust circumference, measure the upper arm circumference, and find out what your comfort zone is. And believe it or not, the last time I measured, or the first time I properly measured a garment, was about a week ago. It was less than a week ago when I cast this sweater on, and I was trying to decide whether I was going to go up or down in size. And I measured one of my favourite jumpers, and I discovered that it was 26 centimetres of positive ease. Sorry, it had 26 centimetres of positive ease, and therefore that is my sweet spot. And I can use that information for so many future projects now. I know that I like 26 centimetres of positive ease. I know that I don't like less ease because I have issues with my hips fitting. And I just feel more comfortable in them. And ease is very personal. You need to figure out what you like and what your favourite kind of ease is. And if you're not very happy with the garments you have in your wardrobe in general, even the shop bought ones, I think a good thing you could do, a good plan, would be to go to a clothing shop where they have clothes that you like the look of. Pick a jumper that you like the look of in your size that you think you are, and then grab a size bigger and a size smaller and go to the changing rooms and try them on, and make sure you don't look at the sizing, because the sizing doesn't matter. I know we all get a bit hung up on what the different sizes are called and how big we should be or how small we should be, but just don't look at the size and just find out which one felt the best to wear. And after that, you don't even have to ever look at the size again. Bring a tape measure with you and measure that garment and find out what that sweet spot for you is. And then when you go to buy a knitting pattern, try and find one that actually prescribes that amount of ease, rather than having to go up and down in needle sizes and in garment sizes. And I think this is a good example for the fact that it's a beauty that so many designers design plain stockinette garments that look similar but might have slightly different gauges and slightly different amounts of ease, and that way you can pick exactly the amount of ease that you would like, because we don't all like the same amount of ease, right? And I think it's really, really helpful to be able to pick from all the vast amounts of raglans or saddle shoulders or drop shoulder stockinette garments. And whenever people say, oh, but really, should you be designing another sweater that looks, you know, just like that one from Petite Knit? Maybe yes, because you might have slightly different ease and a slightly different gauge, and that might serve somebody well. So I think that is a real promoter of having all these different garments that look very similar. They'll all have something slightly different, so find the ease that you like and work with that. And I think that's what I have to start doing more, which is why I'm knitting this sweater. I know I like the silhouettes of Ozetta's patterns in general. I don't think I've ever actually, have I knit, maybe I've knit one of her sweaters before, but I'm not entirely sure. But I really, really like her style. I think it's very wearable, and I knew that that amount of ease would suit me, whereas other designers that might have more stockinette garments that are very similar to Ozetta's might have less ease or more ease, and that might not be for me. And I think that is why we might end up knitting a lot of garments from a certain designer, because, for example, Rebecca Clow from the Creabea podcast, she makes some gorgeous designs, and I really, really, really like her designs. But I think she grades her patterns based off of the ease that she is comfortable with, and that is less ease than I am comfortable with. And therefore, especially when I see test calls, or when this pattern hasn't been knit by that many people yet, I can only really see examples of that pattern with the sort of 10-15 centimeters of ease that Rebecca likes, and I don't like that amount of ease, and therefore I'm not drawn to her patterns. But I like the stitch patterns that she uses. So for patterns like her patterns, I just have to wait until they've been knit by a whole host of people, and then on the Ravelry project pages I can see what people have done who have sized up, and then I might be more drawn to knitting her pattern. So that is kind of how you end up knitting more patterns from certain designers, is because you like their aesthetic, and if they like a certain amount of ease, they are probably going to design a lot of their patterns with that amount of ease. So tip number 1, check your gauge, make sure your gauge is good. Tip number 2, make sure you understand ease and understand how much ease you want and you like, and measure it, and measure yourself regularly, because we all change things. Our bodies change all the time, at least a little bit. So make sure you know how much ease you like, because I haven't. This is the first time, genuinely the first time, that I properly measured the ease that I like was the other day, after 6 years of garment knitting, which is just crazy, isn't it? I'm so sorry, I am really losing daylight today, but I really wanted to film this today, so I'm just going to try and get through the tip number 3, because it's a big one as well, and it might be a completely obvious one, but it wasn't that obvious to me. If you've been watching for a while, you will have seen that I put a video up at the beginning of this year, and it was called Every Sweater I've Ever Knit That I Still Own. And I went through all my sweaters and I tried them on, and then I put them in piles of what I wanted to keep and what I wanted to get rid of. And what was very striking to me is that all the items I wanted to keep were at a very specific colour scheme. They were either neutral and softer kind of neutrals, so soft, warm grey, beige, cream, and then or they were shades of light blue and light green. That was basically it. Those were my colours and the colours that I wanted to keep. And up until then, I pretty much just bought colours that I was drawn to, that I thought were beautiful, and I find lots of different colours beautiful, but apparently I don't like to wear most of them. So I found that it's really important to find out which colours you gravitate towards wearing. And an easy thing you could do, for example, is go through your wardrobe, gather all your upper body garments that you own, try them all on and put them in 2 piles, and basically pretend that you have to get rid of half of your wardrobe and put half of them in a pile and half of them not in another pile. And while you're pretending to get rid of half of your wardrobe, try to decide really quickly, like instantly, sort of, this is what I want to wear, or this is not something I'd have to think about a little bit more about wearing. Like really go with your gut instinct and figure out which garments you would keep. And by doing that, you will hopefully get a bit of an idea of which colours you would like to keep in your wardrobe, and then maybe try to buy more yarns that are actually in that colour scheme. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is to try and consider stitch patterns that you like to wear. I really like wearing stockinette, but I don't always want to knit stockinette. So try to maybe reserve the patterns, the stitch patterns that you don't really want to knit, that you don't really want to wear, but you want to knit, for gift knits. And at the same time, use the stitch patterns that you're drawn to wearing for wearable garments for yourself. For example, I like wearing stockinette. I don't like wearing anything overly complex, but I quite like knitting complex things at times. And especially when I first started garment knitting, I really was drawn to complex garments. And I've discovered that I don't actually end up wearing them. So what I'm going to try my hardest to do is to save those techniques for gifts. And that way gifts will be a bit more exciting to make, because I will knit, you know, things that I want to knit, but I don't necessarily want to keep. And that way it's a bit of a win-win, really. So that is tip number 3. Find out what you actually want to wear. So to recap, tip number 1, learn things about gauge, learn how to modify gauge, learn to measure gauge regularly. Tip number 2, find out how much ease you really like to have and stick to that, because you will likely like a certain type of ease across the board. With one exception, I really like a fitted summer garment. So this is just a shop bought vest top, but if I was to knit a sleeveless vest for summer, I would want that to be with negative ease. But any overgarment, pullover, cardigan, anything like that, I like them to have about 25 centimetres of positive ease. Find out, tip number 3, find out what colours suit you and you're drawn to wearing, and what kind of stitch patterns you're drawn to wearing, and try to stick with those at least for a little while. And if you want to knit something that is a totally different colour and a totally different stitch pattern than something you'd ever want to wear, maybe find a photo online and send it to your friend and say, hey, I really fancy knitting this, would you like to receive this? And you'll be surprised, because some people would really like to have some more hand knits as gifts. So those are my main tips for successful garment knitting. I am massively losing daylight. I am so sorry that I am filming this a bit late. I started this video and I had to call it off after 8 minutes because I was not making any sense to myself. So I had to start again, and now the light is really fading. But I will leave you with a little clip of my dogs on the headland near where I live, where I just took them for a walk prior to filming this. And I actually ended up spotting some dolphins, which was really, really cool. I was hoping to take some photos and insert them, but they were so far away, you can just see black blobs, so it's not worth not worth me sharing. But that has been my afternoon. I've enjoyed lots of knitting and working on this garment, which hopefully is going to be successful. If you want to know if it is, please stay tuned and check out my next podcast episode. Thank you so much for watching.